In this video, we're continuing our fall doodle series with watercolor and creating a very cute scene of a cat and a pumpkin. If you don't know how to draw, I highly recommend checking out my How to Draw Anything video, which teaches you to break down the thing that you want to draw into basic shapes that you know how to draw. So using a pencil and a light hand, I am drawing my cat. I did a basic circle and a couple triangles for its head, a couple rectangles for the scarf, and then an egg shape for its body. I wanted it to be nestled sort of in the pumpkin, so for the pumpkin I drew an egg shape and then a couple of C's and reverse C's around it, which you can see a little bit more clearly here. I'm trying to keep my lines nice and light because I am going to use watercolor on it afterwards, and I want a nice clean look. In my last video, I mentioned that I really like drawing the stem of a pumpkin because you can get really creative with it. You could create it into a little curly Q, or you can create it more realistic or like a little stump. It's totally up to you. And after finishing drawing the details of the scarf and the cat's tail, I'm going in with some rusty orange to create the pumpkin's main color. Near the top of the pumpkin, I'm leaving some white space just to give the illusion of some highlights to make it look 3D. And for the cat, I'm doing the pink ears first, and I'm doing the scarf in a light tan. I'm using my lightest colors first because it's much easier to go darker than it is to go lighter with watercolor. So that's why I started with my orange, and I started with the tan, and then I'm going in with now some brown for the shadows, and eventually I'll move my way to black for the cat. For the shadows of the pumpkin, I focused where the stem is and at the bottom of the pumpkin as well. So even with the black that I'm going to use for the cat, I have watered it down a little bit to create lighter shades of black that I will build up rather than go completely dark, completely black right away, because I want to still have some depth to my cat. So I'm leaving some places a little bit lighter black, a little bit gray, and then I'm going over it several times to create a darker black. Whenever you want your watercolor to be a little bit lighter, you just add more water to it, and then that way more of the paper can show through because you've thinned out the paint. So that's how we've created gray here, whereas with other paints you might mix white and gray together, white and black together, but in the case of watercolor you don't need to do that. You can use the white of the paper as your white, so you just add more water to your black to make it gray. And between each layer of the gray, I wait for it to dry before I go over it with my darker blacks. That way I won't get a runny mess and I won't get puddles and the paper won't warp. So take your time with watercolor. Make sure you're waiting for each layer to dry before you paint on top of it. And I've also given some thought in advance to what parts I want to be darker and what parts I want to be lighter. So I decided to keep his paws completely white, so that way it looks like he has mittens, and then I'm leaving his legs a little bit lighter than the rest of his body, just to give that depth perception. And even though it looks like I'm going pretty quickly, I'm actually going very slowly in real life. So take your time with it, use a small brush to really get those details and so that you don't get too dark too quickly. A trick that you can do is create a dark spot and then add some water to it to spread it out further up the section that you're working in. And that way you'll create a nice natural gradient. So once I'm happy with my watercolor, I can now go over top of it with pen just to give some details, those final details like the ribs in the stem of the pumpkin or in the body of the pumpkin, and just to create a more stylized, cartoony look. But of course we have to wait for the watercolor underneath to dry, otherwise the ink from the pen will also spread just like watercolor would. And I'm just creating a simple pattern for the cat's scarf, but you can create whatever pattern you like on your own cat's scarf. And yeah, now I'm going over the final details of the cat. I'm going over its eyes and its paws just to make sure that they are rounded out nicely and looking good. And now I'm going over the folds of the cat's scarf just to give that more definition and to create that 3D effect. Again, I've waited until all of the watercolor has dried before I go in with my pen and create these details. And here's an up-close look of what I've created. Hopefully you have something similar, but also that's unique to you and your own creativity.